welcome back to Paranormal NL Podcast, located in Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada. That's PNL Podcast for short. I'm your host and founder, Jen Noseworthy. Thank you for tuning in to UPRN, United Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM in New Orleans and 105.3 FM in the Gulf. I've got two special Bigfoot guests from New Mexico and Texas waiting tonight backstage, who I'll bring on shortly. For tonight's UPRN segment number 21, PNL Podcast is sponsored by the Bog Team. It's a boots on the ground Bog Team doing historical paranormal investigations in Newfoundland and Labrador, Canada. PNL Podcast believes in supporting international paranormal networking and highlighting global paranormal people, places, and things. If you'd like to be a guest on my show or have a historical or heritage building you'd like investigated in Newfoundland, contact paranormal.nl.podcast@gmail.com and follow PNL Podcast on the Bog Team on their link tree. Now, let's get on with the show. I've got all the way from New Mexico, we've got Will Jevning, and we've got Joe DeHoyos from Texas. Welcome, y'all.
Well, hello.
Yeah, thanks for having us. We appreciate it.
Now, Joe with me is a frequent flyer. He's back again now. For the folks who are on UPRN, Joe was on season 2, episode 120 with a collab we did with Joel Stern, the linguist, translator about the elusive force poltergeist. And I think you were also on season 2, episode 103. So welcome back.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So do you want to start with Will? Do you want to start with you? What's going on all the way in New Mexico?
It's up to you. It's up to you. You know, it's funny being in New Mexico. You wouldn't think the Southwest you'd have Bigfoot. I was shocked. There's all kinds of stuff going on here.
Yeah, you wouldn't think, right? Because you think, how is he going to hide behind a cactus, right?
I was so surprised. Where we live, it's in southern New Mexico, and it's actually, there's a fair amount of vegetation here. It's not all sand like I always thought it was in this part of the country, but
you've got mountains there too, right? Well,
oh yeah, just east of us, we have a really good view from the house, as a matter of fact, and there's forest just on the other side of that mountain chain. So lots of stuff I hear going on. There was stuff right on the edge of town here a few years ago.
Yeah, now for the folks tuning in who don't know yourself, for a bit of your bio, so Will, you're a Sasquatch researcher, multiple book author about Sasquatch, and the founder of Creek Devil podcast and YouTube. And I want to say thank you for your service, because you're also a USA Army veteran.
Yeah,
so you're welcome. Thank you for your service. And tell us a little bit more about some of your books and your research. And then before we get into that, let's introduce Joe so we can all know who's on the table here.
What's up? I am Joe DeHoyos. I'm here in Houston, Texas. Been here just about all my life in Houston. And I research, the creature we call Sasquatch or Bigfoot, primarily here in Texas. I've been doing that since 2012. Then I started my own podcast, and like I tell everyone, I wouldn't be doing any of this if it wasn't for Will. When he started doing it, I started listening to him, and we became friends, and then he kind of drug me along. Now I'm addicted to this stuff, and it's all because of him.
and you're with Beyond the Woodline podcast,
right? Yeah, and I wouldn't have done any of this if it wasn't for Will. So Will's
a great guy. Listen to Joe's podcast.
What was that?
Joe, were you doing some fanning on Will?
Will was doing another podcast, and then he had a mutual friend, Lupe, and then we just kind of got connected through that, and we've just been friends ever since. And I'm not afraid to say, man, I kind of followed in his footsteps a little bit, and doing my own thing, but
Pardon the pun, but Will's got some big footsteps to follow.
Yeah, man. Oh, I just I can feel him, but I'll follow him.
That's just the virtue of being old.
Oh, and wise.
Yeah.
So how did it all start for you, Will? I know you probably told this story 1,000 times, but
Well,
do
I don't
you
know if I should go into depth on it because it takes a while, but this started for me actually back in 1972 when I was 14. Me and a friend were walking over to another friend's house in the snow. We came across footprints. We didn't know what they were. We'd never heard the word, Bigfoot or Sasquatch. And this was in the South Puget Sound area of Washington State. And it was really cold that morning. We found some intestines. That's what led us to finding the footprints. So the intestines weren't frozen. It scared us. We found these dozens of these big human-like bare feet in the snow. And then I guess when we realized that the intestines weren't frozen yet, that scared us because we knew whatever had put them there,
something was in the area?
it
Yeah.
was close by. So we took off running to my friend John's house, and we're pounding on the door, and there's John answers, and he has two younger brothers and sisters. So it was pandemonium with all these kids in the living room. And his dad was retired Navy and kind of gruff. And he comes out and he's like, "Boys, knock it off. What's going on?" So we told him what we found. He grabbed a 45 pistol and a camera. And he said, "Take me back up there and show me what you found." So this whole gaggle of kids goes up there. And John and I talked about it recently. We're sure that we all destroyed most of the footprints, but he did get a couple of pictures. So he proceeds to tell us what he thinks it is. And of course, we're into, the old monster movies and stuff. And we're thinking, wow, there's real monsters out here in the woods. So we went out looking every weekend for a couple of months, didn't see another thing. So, you're that age, you kind of move on to other things. And 2 years later, when I was 16, my dog was barking right at dusk one evening. And I'm thinking, oh, geez, raccoons or skunks or something. And my dad always told me to shoot anything that come in the yard. So I went and got him, sent him out to the tree line. I had a 22 with a couple of bullets. And he goes to the tree line and he freezes. And I'm thinking, what's he doing? The dog never froze anywhere. So I get up toward him and he comes running back past me. And I'm thinking, dang, maybe he's afraid of a porcupine or something. Or he got into a porcupine once pretty bad.
I'm thinking,
So
what kind of dog? Is he a big dog?
it was a collie.
Collie. Okay.
Yeah. Oh, he was fearless. He was never afraid of anything ever. So I go up to the tree line. I could hear something moving inside the tree line. I'm thinking, okay, maybe the porcupine's back. So I put a bullet in the chamber, and the grass was pretty tall. They're probably about 3 feet high. And this would have been around October because we were getting frost that time of year. And so the tree limbs, the fir limbs hung down into the grass pretty low. So I had to push my way through those. And inside the tree line, there was this big maple tree, really big. Trunk was probably, 3-4 feet across easily. And so as I cleared the tree limbs, I come with it was the tree itself was maybe 20 feet away from me. And here's this massive thing standing to the left of me on the side of the tree trunk, and it was moving leaves around with its right foot. And of course, all this stuff goes through your mind. I'm thinking, what in the heck is that?
What am I
And
looking
then
at? Yeah, right.
then I'm thinking, how do I get out of this one? I'd run into bear when I
Is
was
my
a kid.
gun big enough? Wait. What's it? So what
it's
happened?
you're just in shock. So I thought, well, okay, maybe if I shoot in the air, it'll go away. I shoot in the air, and it stopped when it saw me and just stood there and stared. So I shoot in the air, nothing happens. It didn't move. Then off to my right rear, I hear some noise behind the brush. And here comes another one walking out from behind the brush. And it was slightly smaller than the first one. And it walked over and stood by the first one. I took off running. I just bolted. Now my sister
Like
and
you would,
everybody
right?
made
Yeah.
oh geez. My sisters and everybody made fun of us for finding the footprints 2 years before. So I wasn't saying a word to anybody in the house. I grabbed the phone, I called John, told him what just happened. So a bunch of us got together, 4 or 5 of us got together the next morning before first light with our hunting rifles, and we went out and followed the tracks. And we followed them till I'm guessing around 10 in the morning when the sun had finally melted all the frost, and we lost the trail. And I've said it before, I don't know what we thought we were going to do if we'd have caught up to the 2 individuals, but so we didn't talk about it. John and I were riding the activities bus after school one day. I don't know if we were playing basketball or what we were doing after school, but there were maybe 6 kids on the bus. It was a very rural area, so hardly any kids stayed after school to do anything. And we're in the back of the bus talking real quietly about this. And I swear my friend Jim, or mutual friend, had bat ears because he heard us way over the other side of the bus. And he come over and he sits down and nice guy, but he was small in stature and didn't have many friends and got picked on a lot. So, but he come over and he says, "Well, can I interview you about this?" And I thought, well, Jim doesn't know anybody, so it's not going to go anywhere. I said, "Sure, I'll tell you." And he gave me 3 of John Green's books, Canadian author on the subject of Bigfoot.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, wow, I didn't know there was so much stuff written on this. So followed that summer, the 75. I was sleeping in my room in the afternoon one day, and one of my sisters comes in and says, "Hey, there's 2 men here to see you." And I wake up, I'm thinking, I don't know any men except my uncles or my dad's friends. So I slide on my barn boots and I walk out the back of the house. And from John Green's book, I recognized Renee DeHinden. And I was in shock
Renee,
because,
yeah, okay.
in the 70s, you see somebody in a book, you think everybody's famous, right?
Yeah, they're part of the 4 horsemen of Sasquatch, right?
He invited me up to their camp,
Mhm.
and of course, that's where Green was, and a few other people, and they liked me, so that's our friendship started there, and I would have never gotten involved in this had it not been for those 2, and I knew both of them for many, many years until their deaths.
Yeah, Renee did a lot of field investigations and interviews in the Pacific Northwest, and major advocate for the Patterson film.
Oh yeah, well, he told me, and Renee and I we were much closer than Green and I were as friends, and we used to visit each other all the time for years. And we were talking about that one night at his house, and I said, "So what's the deal with the film? What do you think? Is it real? Not real?" And he says, I worked for 20 years trying to disprove it, and he says I couldn't do it. And if anybody could have disproved anything, that man could have.
Yeah. It makes you wonder. I'm a big believer in the cloaking aspect of it, or maybe interdimensional. There's got to be something more to it. I mean, if an octopus can do what he does, what can't Bigfoot do? Stuff like that. What do you think, Joe?
Yeah, I'm not too much into that belief. I'm pretty much in the flesh and blood camp. And just simply because almost every single witness that I've spoken with have described a flesh and blood creature. And you look at all the podcasts that talk about Bigfoot. They're all describing a flesh and blood creature, and the people that do talk about the woo aspects, there are few and far between. And
But if a creature that big wants to hide, and he's intelligent enough, he can really. Think about like here in Newfoundland, where I'm from, on the little island. There's been a lot of big cat sightings, but very elusive and hard to find. But there are a lot of sightings, and people have even said they've seen Sasquatch, the hairy man, and whatnot here too, because we were part of the Appalachian Mountains. But yeah, you guys are totally right. If something wants to not be found, they are intelligent, they could easily hide.
Extremely.
yeah,
And I
yeah, and
always tell people, if it's not physical, then why do they poop in the woods?
Well, so you were talking about poop with Cat Ward, and about how in the zoo the monkeys throw stuff at you.
Oh yeah.
There was an instance. You mentioned an instance about that?
I had a witness who, I was talking to Tom, my former co-host who passed away last year. We were talking about that, and I said, we were talking about different things different primates do, and comparative anthropology. And I said, of all the things that Sasquatches do, which are very similar to other primate species, very similar in their behaviors in many ways, I said, I haven't heard them, like chimps do, commonly throw their feces at people and other animals. And I'll bet you within a couple, 2-3 days, I had somebody contact me with that very incident, and it actually hurt the guy. It hit him with such force, the quantity and the force were such that it really, I don't know that it caused serious injury, but it really hurt the guy.
That's a lot
painfully.
of poop. And
That's a lot of poop.
something, it's got to be a large animal, right? You were talking about the cow pie high school.
You know about that, Joe, right? Where I went to high school, the school was out in the middle of a pasture. It was very rural, that whole area, and there wasn't any town near the school. So because the school was out in the pasture, we all nicknamed it Cow Pie High.
Cow Pie High. There you go.
Now, Joe, you've had some experiences yourself, no?
Yeah, I haven't had a full on sighting, but me and my good friend Walter, we've had a couple of hairy incidents, no pun intended.
You have.
And we actually wound up uh, leaving. This was probably 2 years ago, I would say. We actually wound up leaving in the middle of our, I guess, investigation, if that's what you want to call it, because we weren't even there, but 3 4 minutes, and we were pretty much ran out of the woods, and uh, that shook us up pretty good because whatever it was, and I told Will this story, whatever it was, there was multiple animals or creatures, and they didn't leave the area, and we've
What
never
was
had
it that scared you the most? The sound or just the feeling? Or both?
both because we heard what sounded it, like this tongue popping, or I don't know
Mhm.
what to describe it. It was like a
That word they go.
yeah,
Now,
but
I was
it
just
was really loud.
watching something where that's part of their mating, where they do the teeth thing, right, Will?
What's that now? As far as
Where they put their teeth together, like, and use that as sort of like a mating call for the teeth. Have you
I
heard that?
well, no, I haven't. There's nobody. I don't think anybody knows anything about mating calls or anything like that. Now, the only thing I'll say, what I thought we had a situation. We were in Central Oregon a couple of years ago, and conducting a more in-depth investigation of that area in the Three Sisters Wilderness. And we were going to go up real high one night to put the parabolic mic up to see if we could get any kind of audio going up there. And then it dawned on me once we were up there for about an hour. I thought, well, shoot, they're all down in the valleys. We're not going to hear anything up this high. So we drove down into the valley, and it was around 2 a.m, and I just didn't feel right about going all the way in. So I told the guys, I said, well, let's pull off over on the spur road and see what we can hear. So the parabolic mic wasn't working because one of the batteries was shot. We didn't know that at the time. So Tom's brother's a tech guy. He was working to get it going. And we started hearing about 65 yards out in front of us what sounded like logs being thrown around. It was just this loud boom, 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 all this crashing going on. And there was no roads, no trails, anything out there. And the only thing I could think of was that maybe it was the younger ones, kind of showing off for a potential mate. But that's the only thing I've ever experienced or heard of in that world. Now, as far as the teeth goes, that's just like, I think it's just communication amongst each other
Could
for
be.
whatever they're doing. Yeah.
I think I might have heard that somewhere on the Finding Bigfoot or something like that. No, I think one of y'all mentioned something about animals hung in a tree.
Oh, yeah. You've seen that too, haven't you, Joe? Oh, not
Have
hearing
you
Joe.
seen it? I think he might be on a call.
Okay,
And
no, there you go. Yeah,
He
yeah,
got
yeah, yeah,
muted.
yeah. No, yeah, I've seen that before. I haven't personally seen it, but I've seen pictures, and uh, I think it's something that does happen.
When we were up on the Navajo's reservation in October, our guide Donovan, who's Navajo, they invited us up there. We were out in the Chusca Mountains on the northern part of it, and periodically he would get out and take off in whatever direction. And my friend Adam and I, we had kind of how our search pattern worked. So Don took off in this one direction, and he hollered across the field. He said, "Hey guys, come and look at this." So we went over there, and it was a couple hundred yards away from where this dirt road. And you have to understand, the Chusca Mountains, it's only Navajo that are up there, and there's very few of them up there during that time of year. Most of them are heading in, or they're pinion nut picking. So there was nobody up there. Hadn't been anybody up there for a long time, and the local native police told us to go up there and look specifically for these things. So we go over to where Don was looking, and he'd gone into the tree line, and inside the tree line, about 6 or 7 feet up, is this deer skull, and there were four antler points on each side. So depending on what part of the country or the world you're in, you count them differently. So anyway, these antlers were jammed into the tree, facing into
okay.
the forest. You had never seen this from the road. And then he was educating us on what the Navajo do with deer when they kill deer and other animals. And he said that was nothing that they would do. That was these things. And then we did find some of the territorial markings up in there, but you'd never seen it from the open area of the road. So this was something they did only for them.
Interesting.
We just happen to be lucky enough to find it.
So some kind of a marker or saving
Some
it
kind of
for later?
marker. Yeah, something.
What do you both of y'all think about other markers that people talk about, trees upside down or trees stood up next to other trees? What do you think about that kind of a stuff?
You want to tackle that one, Joe?
Well, it's interesting that she brought that up because I did want to ask you about that because I've always heard about the upside down tree.
Mm-hmm.
The gentleman here in Texas, well, that I've been seeing, it's got private property. We were talking in October, and he was telling me that when he was young, that because this is all private land, and he's got some very swampy area. He says that he remembers seeing trees upside down, and I've heard this so much, and I just wondered what what you yourself thought about that.
The only time I ever heard of that was up in Prince of Wales Island, towards Alaska, and that was kind of for a long time sort of an isolated circumstance or case, but I have heard people say it elsewhere and sent me pictures. I don't know, because what I got, and this goes back to in one of Green's books, he had a story of a couple of guys who were trapping in Alaska, and it probably happened in the 40s, but the story was published in 1963 in Sports Field magazine, and the local Indians, or this group of Indians, the Den Indians, they were hunting caribou, and they came to the two white guys and they said they wanted to camp with them because Gilliuk, was up there, wasn't hunting caribou, it was hunting men, or 8 men. So they said it doesn't molest the white man, so maybe it won't bother us if you guys are in the camp, right? Pretty reasonable. So they took these guys and showed them its mark, and they talked about this sapling being mangled, and they talked about it. The wording exactly was twisted like a matchstick, and you have to think about what were matchsticks like in the 40s. Well, they were all wooden matches. They weren't the paper things that we got later. So, and I remember my dad, of course, he was a World War II vet, and, my mom too, she worked for the government then. And the terminology people used during that time period and what it meant. And then they talked about twisting things, and usually it meant breaking them like that. They'd say twist, they meant break. So I was at Bob Titmus's house one time in the 80s or 90s, I can't remember, 80s, I think. And he was taking me around showing me these different things that he'd found in Bluff Creek. And these tree limbs were maybe, they were only about an inch thick, and they were snapped in half and kind of turned over on themselves. And he had dozens of them in the house, piles of them. And he said that him and another guy were following a set of 15-inch tracks one time, and they came across these periodically along the line of tracks. And he says, I don't know, maybe as it walked along, it was just snapping these things. And in the back of my mind, I'm listening to him, but I'm thinking, I just wasn't very impressed with that. But I also used to think, for Sasquatches, if they're like other primates, they're going to mark territory. But it's got to be like background noise, things that we just automatically assume are there, and it doesn't mean anything to us, especially, with, weather breaks and stuff like that. So fast forward to 1991, a friend of mine and I were in this river watershed area, and we decided to hike up the ridge to a saddle that it was in between two drainage systems, and the drainage systems had a lot of sightings on both of them. So we assumed that the saddle was a conduit between the two drainage systems.
Right.
So we got up this slope about 2,200 feet in elevation, and we stopped for a break. And this is a closed canopy, right? Not a lot of underbrush. So here was this Doug fir tree, maybe 15 feet tall, about 3 inches thick. And I had my tape measure, so I measured where the break was. The tree was snapped over 90 degrees, 8 feet 1 inches off the ground. And there was no indication whatsoever how that happened. There was no claw marks from bear. Of course, black bear's not going to reach that high anyway, let alone have the capacity to do that. It wasn't rotten. It was a fresh tree. It was freshly done in the middle of July, covered by, so no wind or anything. I mean, it was just no reason that was broken like that. Then we looked off as far as we could see to the northeast, and we see another one. So we kept going in that direction. We found 13 of these things in a line. And I was taking pictures and measurements. So when we get back, I had a friend who was an Indian from the Klamath Reservation. And I showed him my pictures, and he kind of chuckled. And he says, "Oh, you finally found that." I'm thinking, I said, "What do you mean finally found it? Why didn't you tell me what I'm looking for up there?" you know. And
So
he was
he knew.
he was a jokester. He knew. And so he told me, he says, "Well, that's how they mark territory." And he said, "What you found, that line, that was the big guy of the group telling the rest of them which way we're going to the next feeding area." And then
Oh,
he said,
okay.
"Sometimes they'll snap trees to mark an area with high human activity as kind of a warning to their own kind that, hey, this is not a good place to go."
Not a good place to go. What do you
And
think
once you
about
start, oh,
it
go ahead. I'm sorry.
once you start what? No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just
So
going to say that, these things, once you see what they look like, you really can't mistake them for weather breaks or anything else. And it's only in places where there's current activity that you see these things.
okay.
And you know what's interesting about that too? Well, we've talked about that in that same area that me and Walter got ran out of, which
Hmm.
is I call his area, is where
Yeah,
we found that branch. It was like a good 10, 12
you
feet
did.
off, and not only was it snapped, but it was
It's
twisted
twisted.
like a yeah, it was
Twisted.
twisted
Yeah,
like a dish
they'll
rack,
either they'll either snap or twist a tree.
and it was hanging over the road, and that was the only
Yeah.
tree on the way in there that was like that. And there's several trees, where the canopy kind of goes over the road.
Oh
And,
yeah.
of course, right away, people were like, well, there's 18 wheeler. Like, there's no 18 wheeler going down
No.
this road. And windstorm. And even if it was a windstorm, why would that one tree be damaged?
And not the way
Uh,
it was.
yeah. And yeah.
I've found them both twisted and snapped, and like I said, you really can't, especially the really dramatic ones. I consider that a dramatic one. That's a very good
Yeah.
one.
And of course, the one Walter saw there was 9.5 feet tall, which is,
Yeah. Yeah.
which is a big boy, especially for here in Texas. Yeah.
Oh
So
yeah.
he could have
Yeah.
reached up there easily.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder about, the different things that they do uh, as communication. And not only that, but I know I've talked with a couple different people, Al and Sarah Bignell, recently about gifting. Do y'all have your own theories on gifting?
Well, it's not a good idea to give them stuff.
Yeah, I don't think it's a good idea. And I'm not saying that they don't do that, but I don't think they do it as much as
Mm.
people think, because there's so
Right.
many other animals that bring stuff. I mean,
Hmm.
squirrels, possum, birds, they will bring you stuff,
Yeah.
unless they're bringing you, something huge, if I can explain it, you know, with a smaller animal, because I've never seen anyone say, "Hey, look, he brought me a big old, side of beef or something." It's always something
Right.
small, a pebble, a rock, a
Yeah. You
bottle
have to
cap.
think, well, why would they do that? I mean,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So what other things do you find interesting about them that really got you hooked, besides the fact that you had your own encounters? Is Do you have like your own bucket list of Bigfoot things that you want to do?
Joe, you want to go first?
A bucket list. People ask me all the time, is there a bucket list of place that I want to go to? And I said, man, I got a perfect place here in Texas. Walter's area.
Yeah.
That's it. It doesn't get any better than that. We've had encounters there that I believe we've had experience there at the very least. We found good markings. We found, the hog with his head ripped off. We found
Oh yeah.
prints, so I mean, I'm in the prime area as far as that goes. The only other thing I'm going to do is actually go out with Will and meet him face to face one day, and hopefully I can do that soon. But other than that,
Yeah,
that's really it.
I was gonna just lead into that, Will, on your research group. Did y'all want to talk a little bit about that?
On the JRG group.
Yeah.
Well, part of the problem with this topic is finding out where stuff is currently going on, and you really need a network. And I learned that from Green and DeHinden. That's what they were doing when they kind of enlisted me into helping them find things. They were trying to uh, have people in local areas when something happened. They would contact you, and then you're sort of the clearinghouse for this stuff that's going on. And that's kind of what we do with the JRG. I mean, it also on Facebook, I think, what do we have, about 4,300 members on the group now? And that's a tough crowd. Man, that's if you're not common sense with that group, they will chew you to pieces. But they're great people. They're really great people because I want people to think. I want them to think critically about things, not nonsense. There are concrete reasons for anything that happens, and just requires a little bit of digging and a little bit of thinking.
Do you prefer the LiDAR scan or the actual cast for when you do your research? Which one do you think is better?
I'm an old guy, so I just use plaster.
And when it's raining out and stuff like that, though, do you use different technique if it's in a really wet area where it just won't set, shall we say?
I've never had that problem. The only problem I had was nobody told me how to cast the first times. I was in Skamania County and found this really nice set of 15-inch tracks on a logging road.
Right?
Well, I didn't know how to cast, so I wasn't thinking about it. I cast the prints and let them dry. Well, tracks, you gotta. I carry a buck knife with me now. I use that because you gotta dig them out, especially if it's in hard packed soil, because you'll break the cast all to heck. In fact, that's what
Mm.
happened to Roger Patterson. The
Oh,
day they
no.
filmed the Sasquatch, they cast 3 tracks and only 2 of them made it out.
Okay. Hmm.
But then Bob
So,
Titmus went back and cast more of them. So,
so do you have any other tips for when you do casts?
um,
Bring a
well,
knife,
there's, I mean,
something to dig it
well,
out.
I have a book called Bigfoot Fieldwork 101, and I've actually had people. A friend of mine who's a retired colonel from the Army. There were some tracks in Central Texas a couple of years ago, and he was the closest one. I wasn't able to get down there. Beautiful line of tracks, several hundred prints on the line on a ranch, and so he called me and he says, "Well, what do I do?" I said, "You got a copy of my book?" He says, "Yes." I said, "Well, follow the procedures in there in terms of measurements and casting and all that." So he ended up getting a couple of beautiful casts, did some great job on measurements and things. So on prints, to me, it's more about the measurements and photographs and all that kind of stuff, because there are some very particular. It used to be, for example, people would call stride the measurement between 2 footprints from the toe of one print to the heel of the next. That's not stride. That's not even a correct measurement of step, because if you're going to measure those correctly, you do from toe to toe or heel to heel, and you have to do a minimum of 3 of those measurements to get an average. And then stride is the arc swing of one leg from, let's say, one right foot to the next consecutive right foot, and measured the same way. Those are the correct measurements. So, if people want to do that correctly, get a copy of my book. It'll tell
Yeah,
you how
you
to do
do
it.
have a lot of books. You've got like 8 books out there, hey?
I have 9, working on number 10 currently.
9, I'm working on 10, and you get
Yeah.
a couple films coming out too, no?
Oh, we have Bigfoot Evidence Oregon, and that was my friend Adam, who works in Hollywood. We weren't setting out to make a film, but Adam filmed so much of what we were doing, he decided to put together this documentary. And like I said, it's called Bigfoot Evidence Oregon. It's on Tubi, and I can't remember what YouTube channel it's on, but there's a few different outlets, Apple TV, stuff like that. But we do have two that are getting ready to come out.
I'll
That
put
are
that link
so
in the
much.
bio so folks can watch it.
Yeah, the next 2 are so much better because, just because of the witnesses we have in there, and there were some things we did at the Navajo reservation. Like I'll tell you one of the more interesting things quickly. When we were there, we kept going into the Chusca Mountains in this one road. So we come in there the second or third time in a row, and there are lots of wild horses up there. So right next to the road, the tree line is maybe 100 feet from the road. So 40 feet off the road was a complete horse carcass laying there. It was just the bones, but they were still articulated. No, they weren't there the day before. This animal was not there the day before. And we went back, and Adam filmed everything we were doing, driving, the whole works. And we've reviewed the film, and there was nothing there the previous day. So something had carried this carcass out and placed it there.
Oh,
Now, if that
okay.
isn't bizarre, I don't know what is.
That is bizarre. What do you think about that, Joe?
Yeah, I think that's pretty great. Yeah, I didn't
It,
know that, Will. That's the first time I heard it.
it,
Yeah.
it was some kind of message. Like I said, the bones were all still connected. It was all bones, but the animal was still all connected, except 3 of the ribs were broken out.
Hmm.
And then we did go in the tree line. We did find at least one more disarticulated horse corpse. But the interesting thing about all these bones on both animals were that none of the bones had been chewed on by scavengers like porcupines and things like that. There were no chew marks on any of the bones whatsoever, which I found kind of strange also.
Yeah, because you think there would be. I wonder why they
There is.
stayed away from it.
Well, the local Navajo told us there was an old white Sasquatch that lived up there year round eating horses. So, and I was never a proponent of structures until we met a family picking pinyon nuts, and they told us they found two of them. They told us where to find them, and they saw an infant Sasquatch lying in the smaller one, and it didn't move. It was reddish brown color. It lay there very quiet. And then when Mama poked its head out of the brush, they all took off running. So Adam and I, we parked the Jeep, hiked up that road. They said it was about a quarter of a mile up there. We didn't find it. And I said, well, people judge distance differently. So let's go. We ended up going about a mile up that road. And lo and behold, we did find a small structure, very rudimentary. It wasn't like these ornate things you see people posting, nothing like that at all.
Right.
So you had a credible family that saw this. They actually saw the creatures utilizing this thing. And then they told us later the one they found was closer to the main road, but it had been taken down and scattered. But we did find the second one and the beginnings of a larger one next to it. So their story was totally credible. We did find the object. It was very rudimentary, what I would expect a primate in the wild. If it was smart enough to make something, that's what it would make. So I had to revise. I mean, I'm always willing to revise my opinion on something if the evidence supports revision. And
Well,
in this case,
when you talk about the trees and stuff like that, I was talking to another person who talked about a bushfire, and a gentleman in a helicopter had seen a lot of the Bigfoot running from fire. What do y'all think about what's going on in California, and do you think that that's pushing them further somewhere else,
No.
or what do you think about
I'll tell you
that?
what happens with these areas that burn. When you go, and I showed Tom this, I said, when you go back to an area the following year after a forest fire, what do you see in that area? You see lots of leafy plants just proliferate in that stuff because it provides nitrogen in the soil, which leafy plants love. So what's attracted to that area? Plant eaters. What's attracted to plant eaters? The predators. The Sasquatch
Follow
is a
the
predator.
chain,
So
right? Yeah.
absolutely. So it's not a bad thing. It's caused a proliferation of their species. I've seen more juvenile tracks in the past 3 or 4 years than I've ever seen before.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of talk about juveniles lately. What do you think
Lots
about
of
that,
juveniles.
I just think they're being seen more, and I think they're probably just being reported more. But I've seen small tracks. Several years ago, I found a 3-inch track, a little footprint in the middle of a creek in
Really?
the San Luis Forest. Yeah,
Oh,
and I didn't take a picture of it because the guy I was with was freaking out. But I should have taken that picture. And but then years later, this is like maybe 2017, I got
Yeah.
an 8-inch print that I took in that same creek.
Oh
Here's
no!
that's a
Oh my
3-inch
gosh!
print I had.
Will.
Yeah,
Wow!
That's a
Look
3-inch
at
cast.
that.
yeah.
That's
And
amazing.
do you remember Mary from San Antonio, Will, that we talked to?
Yeah.
She had found a
Yeah.
3-inch print in her driveway, and she lives out in the country, And she
I
was
have a
like,
witness.
yeah.
I
And
have a witness
why
on
do you guys
Western.
think though that it's only just the one print that a lot of people see?
Oh, it's not. It's always more. Yep. People are funny about that. It's, and I'll tell you about the gal in Central Texas when these are weird things. These guys are designed structurally very different than we are, and they can do things differently when they're walking, things that we're not able to. So in this line of tracks, she went back and videoed the tracks for me and was counting them. And
Okay.
at one point in the line of tracks, it looks like the tracks just stop. Well, they don't. What they make is this really bizarre angle going back in the other direction. But the tracks continued. But in our way of thinking, it appeared to have stopped. And then I know professional trackers that say sometimes you got to get down ground level with the tracks and look at the soil and see what's going on there. but they
Right,
don't do
and I
Spanish.
know you have a lot of experience talking with the Navajo folks, and I'm sure they're
Mhm.
really good trackers, and
Oh yeah, yeah,
they can tell you a lot of stories about
yeah, and
tracking.
they have. We're going back up there hopefully this summer. Um, we had I interviewed an EMT up there recently, and she sent, well, it wasn't her, it wasn't her pictures, it was people that she knew in that lived next to her, and there were at least 3 or 4 pictures that people have taken. They said the creatures are there all the time, broad daylight, and they said, yeah, come on up, we'll take you out there. So
Amazing.
we're gonna do that this summer.
Awesome. And what do you guys think about the infants? Do you think they are carried around mostly, or they walk with the group, or are they
Well,
the ones with
this
the
little
high
track
pitched
here,
whistle? Yeah.
this little track here was found. There was a 15-inch set of tracks not far from this one, but
Okay.
this one was walking unaided.
Hmm.
So that's a big clue right there. I mean, I don't think they have to be developmentally. I don't think they're as needy as we are. I think
Do
they're
you
much.
think that the high pitched noise that we hear is the female or the male or the baby?
It's hard telling. Um, when we were up the reservation, we stayed at a hotel up there, and there was next to the highway, and there was just an interpreter center that was closed down up there, and then a big mesa across the back of it. And it was funny. We got Don got a text message from the northern part of the reservation, 2-hour drive away, that there was screaming going on. So we loaded up. We took off up there, waited around for an hour after we got there, and then a 2-hour drive back. So 5 hours invested in this. Didn't get
Wow.
anything. We were back at the hotel 8 minutes, and I went upstairs to my room, and I get a text from the guys. They said, "Come outside." And as I'm walking to my door, you could hear this screaming blasting through the wall. So this
Hmm.
thing had come down with screaming bloody murder. We recorded it for more than an hour doing that. And the locals were saying, "Oh yeah, it comes down every couple of days and gives everybody in the town hell, then it wanders off." It was no big deal to them. In fact, there were a
And
couple of people blasting your horns trying to get it to shut up.
I hear a lot of people say they can feel it right through them, right, Joe? Like almost like infrasound. They're so loud and
Yeah.
deep, almost like a lion's roar. But then on the flip side, when you think about, I guess, different animals making sounds, that the cheetah looks like a big, strong animal, but it goes meow, meow, really tiny
Mm-hmm.
little sounds, right?
So does mountain
So,
lion.
Yeah.
right? Yeah, yeah. So with
And
the
then
with
you have the
the
fox that screams bloody murder.
yes.
Then there's tigers that can imitate a cow.
Yeah.
There's so many different vocalizations that they're
Mm-hmm.
doing, and then that they can use. But we definitely know that the big growl is the male for sure.
Yeah. One time we were out at this other location, not too far from what I call Walter's area, maybe 5 miles away. And this was years before I met Walter. And uh, someone had told me to take a dog whistle, right? So I took it and I've blown it like
Uh-oh.
4 or 5 times.
Oh,
And
no.
man, we got a growl back, and that growl came from point A to point B. And like I tell everyone this story, it didn't fill up the forest. I mean, it came straight at us
Now,
like, don't
Joe, was that
blow that
dog
damn
man
whistle.
or was that Bigfoot, though? Did
I
you
don't
just
know, but
walk the wrong
it was,
one?
well, it's a Bigfoot territory, so I'm going to go with Bigfoot. Because yes, that's what's been seen in that area. But I think that thing did not like that dog whistle, and I still have it in my gear, but I've never used it since then. But maybe
You
one
know,
day I'll.
No, I bet you didn't. Will, have you got
Don
any
tried all.
whistle stuff?
Oh yeah, we when we were up the reservation here recently, Don, it cracked me up. Don, and this was off our buddy Chuck Slabs. He had an Aztec death whistle, so he
Oh,
said it
no.
worked in Oklahoma. So Don ordered one. I think Adam had one too, and I'm not a big proponent of guy because I've never seen them react to anything. So they were up there every time chance you got blowing these things. Nothing ever happened. So we did meet a family, and they invited us to their Hogan to be interviewed on camera this particular evening. So we were up there, and I don't know, it must have been around 10 or 11 o'clock in the evening. And so we were in there and the Hogan is kind of a round structure that the Navajo build, their traditional building. And thank God they had a roaring fire going because it was really cold up there. But they were telling us, I guess it was the grandfather had most of the experience. We didn't get a chance to meet him, but this family, because they were up there most of the year, Navajo have their houses in their towns, but they also have kind of homesteads out, but they close them down in the fall before it snows. And they're mostly abandoned, but these people were there year round. So anyway, after we filmed, we all went outside, and the father of the group, they were telling us there were all this stuff. There were a place called Twin Buttes above us, and we tried getting up there during the day, couldn't get up there, really rough country. And so he goes out and he does up towards the buttes a couple of what sounded, I guess I would interpret it as like a war cry. He did that twice. And within 2 minutes, these things started whistling down back at us, just like a man whistling.
Interesting.
And there was just so much. They said they would come down to the fence line. They wouldn't actually come in the yard. But they even nicknamed one of them George. They see it so often there. George, yeah. And they had a travel trailer up the trail a little ways. They were telling us about that. And he was showing us with these hands. He was a big guy, and he'd hold his arms out like this with his hands spread. And he said another hand width beyond his, they found on the trailer these 2 big muddy handprints. And wow. That's going to be in the film about our Navajo trip. So just lots of interesting stuff. But the whistles now, natives will talk about whistling all the way from, British Columbia down. That's kind of the hallmark of what they say Bigfoot does is whistling. And they responded to him.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned the cheetahs, because the whistling to me sounds like something you'd hear from a smaller animal, or it almost sounds feminine, right? But who's to say it's not from larger animals, right?
Oh,
in
yeah.
the animal kingdom.
Well, when you look at some of the Kwakiutl masks and other ceremonial masks from Northwest Indians, when you see the pursed lips, that's one of these creatures, and that's the whistling lips.
That's the whistle. But Joe's not going to use his whistle anymore, though.
Not yet.
We never got a response out of the whistles.
You didn't get one?
They knew who we were apparently, and like we're not dealing with you guys.
But you know what? I think I'm going to buy one anyway and try that just to see what happens.
The Aztec death whistle.
Yeah, yes, just to see. I mean, they might.
Chuck said it worked in Oklahoma.
Okay, well,
So you never know.
I'll try just about anything, but
So what do you guys think is the golden evidence? Is it the hair with the no medulla, or like what do you want to get that you don't have that's golden?
Personally, hair and blood are worthless, and I'll tell you why. Because a friend of mine who was a cop here, he's actually a cop in Texas now, but he was then too. He lived here, but he worked in Texas. Anyhow, him and a deputy sheriff friend of his, and it was funny because when I was still living in California that night, he was texting me while they were doing this. And they went out and looked at the place. There was a 15-year-old kid that was followed home one night by one of these things. And he had the feeling he was being followed. And Las Cruces doesn't have a lot of street lights. So he was over towards where the pecan orchards are, where the Rio Grande River is. So it's real green and lush over there. And so the kid stopped under the first street light he came to. And he looked behind him, and here's this thing on all fours. And it was 6 feet high on all fours. And he went to take off on his bike. The thing reached out, grabbed his bike. The kid flies off the front of the handlebars, gets up and runs. So he gets home, and they end up calling the sheriff's department. They come out there, and the deputy was kind of like, well, I'm not really buying this story. And the kid says, hey, I'll take you back out there and show you. So he took him up on it. They went back out there, and sure enough, all this panned out. So my cop buddy and the deputy, they went out and they retrieved the kid's bike. The frame of the bike was bent. And it was thrown 15 feet up into a pecan tree.
Oh
so when they retrieved the bike, now you got to understand, this is a deputy sheriff and a police officer, 2 cops.
Right.
So there's a chain of custody that began with this. The deputy collected a blood sample that was on the bicycle frame, and he sends it off to the lab in Texas, thinking it's going to be just the inexpensive, what they call the $20 test to see if it was maybe somebody in the system, right? Well, nothing happened for about a year. Then he gets a call for the sheriff to come into his office. And the sheriff wasn't very happy about why they were spending $60,000 on a DNA test. It was a full spectrum analysis, right? And all it came back was unknown primate.
No.
And
no
yeah, so that's
way.
well, I actually
primate.
interviewed a DNA expert some years ago when I wrote my first book in Canada. And I said, he was reluctant when he found out what I was writing about. I said, look, I don't want to talk about Bigfoot. I want readers to understand how DNA works. And then he says, oh, okay, I'll talk about DNA. So DNA thinks people think this is some magic thing you can just plug some, sample into and you're going to get an answer out of. Well, that's not how it works. It depends on how much material on a particular species is in the system. Like with humans and dogs and chimps, things like that, we know a lot about, we put a lot in, you can get some good stuff back. But something that's unknown, all it's going to do is come back to the nearest thing that's close to it.
Yeah, the AI is going to do a big question mark and go, I don't know, ape,
right.
chimp, right? It's not in the system, right?
So personally, I look at behavioral stuff. That's the most important evidence to me, and the preponderance, not just one or two things. I'll tell you something like with footprints. All these people that are, quote unquote experts, they all want to prattle on about mid-tarsal break or fingerprints or this or that. That's going to be the end-all proof of the thing. But the biggest thing they miss is how flexible the foot pad is. And I've got probably 6 of the Patterson cast behind me here, and they all show different levels of foot flexibility based on what that foot walked on. And in one cast, and I could show you if you want me to, but
sorry, I grabbed one. We're up on the 51-minute mark, but run.
See, I think this is more important about footprints. They used to talk about things. They used to talk about foot flexibility. Okay, I don't know if we can see this.
Hold it up. There you go. Okay.
So people used to think when Green and DeHoyos and those guys talked about foot flexibility, they were talking about the foot. They were thinking how the foot flexes like that. That's not what they meant. What they meant was how thick. And if you can see this, if I can hold it right, you see where it dips down here?
Right. Yep.
Okay. This foot, what it did, you see this area here is a big, oops, I'm going the wrong way. So there was probably a rock or something there when the foot stepped on it. And the rest of the foot molded around that object. That's what they were talking about, foot flexibility. And these things, if you're going to talk about something being legitimate, when those tracks were made, there was a guy named Ray Wallace who was the general contractor in that area. He was the one who hired the crews to go in and make the roads and the logging crews, things like that. And it wasn't until, and in fact, I'm doing some filming. We're actually creating a TV show, but I did some filming of myself talking about some of this stuff recently. And I went to bone up on Wallace. Well, Wallace never once claimed that he went out and did that. It wasn't until after he passed away in 2002 that his son came out and said that his father hoaxed this stuff. Well, there were 2 problems with that. Number one, the wooden feet don't match any of the casts that were ever made during that decade in that area. And second part was, let's see, there were 2 parts. I lost my train of thought there for a sec. Well, the foot flexibility, with wooden feet, you don't get that flexibility, that foot molding around objects, right?
Right.
And there was even a case where Renee told me that him and Green were called down there by Al Hodgson, who the road crews had told him they found a bunch of tracks one day. So those guys, it would take 2 or 3 days to drive from British Columbia down to Northern California, right? So the road crews aren't going to stop because they find Bigfoot tracks. They're going to keep working and destroy most of them. So when they did get there, they pointed out to where the tracks had gone off the road. They still counted 996 tracks in that line of tracks. Now that's really rugged country. It's very
that's a lot
up
of
and
tracks.
down. That's a lot of tracks. And if somebody wearing a wooden foot with a single leather strap across the back isn't going to be able to do that, let alone produce the foot flexibility of the pad molding around things in the soil.
And the rocks, yeah.
So the claim is nonsense, and that's the only theory that was ever put forward about tracks being fake, was wooden feet.
So that's why you think the golden one, that what the question is, it's not hair, it's not blood, it's the cast, it's the mold. You want to show that.
Well, that's part of it. I mean, you have footprints,
Yeah.
you have territorial markings. I've just started learning some stuff about bedding. I don't want to go too much into yet because I want to go out and make sure that we're certain on that. There's feeding behavior. There's just a whole bunch of stuff that they do, and things like, you know, the horse carcass being packed into the road, and that was obvious. Something directed toward us because we were the only ones up there. And I don't know what that was meant. Maybe that was meant to, you know, stay the heck out of here. I have no clue.
It's interesting, though. And all of your books, I'm sure they go into all this in much more depth. And folks, we're coming up on the 55-minute mark. Do you guys want to give a shout out to where people can find you and all your work and all your good stuff? And you're listening in on UPRN, you know, the Public Radio Network, 107.7 FM, 105.3 in the coast. Joe, do you want to start off with where people can find you and all your good stuff?
Yeah, you could just type in my name on any social media platform. You'll find me. I'm on YouTube, on Beyond the Woodline, my own podcast. I'm not hard to find. You guys have something strange or weird happen to you, hit me up. I'd love to have you on the show, you know.
And I'll put your website on your bio too, so folks can find you. And how about you, Will? Do you want to give a shout out to your fans and where folks can find you?
Well, it's probably easiest if you go on my web, the books and background information. You can also contact me directly at Jevning. You know what we do with the podcast? I have almost 1,000 episodes on YouTube now. It really helps. It's sort of therapeutic for witnesses to come forward and talk to us. Tell me, I just didn't know what to do with myself until I was able to talk to you guys better afterwards. And I think, Joe, you probably find the same thing.
Yeah. Oh yeah, all the time. Yeah. People like, if it wasn't for this guy that I heard on your show or whatever, I wouldn't have told anybody my story. Yeah.
It makes a huge difference.
Thank you so much for all of your research that you've done and that you're putting out there for people to read and study and understand. And I guess, Joe, your new wife, congratulations. She's enacted it into the Bigfoot realm now. She's going to become a Bigfoot expert too.
She doesn't want to go out in the woods with me for that, but yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Well, I get the same thing at home, so, you know.
Yes, Will, I bet your wife has put up with a lot. I mean, you've been doing this now for years. And again, thank you for your service. Not only the Bigfoot service, but the veteran service.
Military time. Thank you.
And you guys want to give another shout out to your fans who are listening?
Thanks for tuning in, guys. We appreciate it. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
If you got any questions for them, you can write them in the comment section when this goes on the live stream. Hopefully Joe and Will can join us in, and they can chime in and answer some of your questions if you have them about some of your burning issues that you want to know about Bigfoot.
and send me questions, because that's what's going into the next book I'm currently working on.
Yeah, so put in the comment section some of the questions you have about Bigfoot. There's a lot of them out there. It's an interesting topic. It's a worldwide topic. They're all over the place, right, guys?
They are.
Well, thanks again for tuning in, everybody, and listen in on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to Paranormal NL Podcast on UPRN. And thanks again, Joe, and thanks again, Will. We really appreciate having you on the show today.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thanks so much. You guys take care now and have an awesome Bigfoot day.
In the shadows where the spirits weep, a team of souls